inflation, 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 and you'll never be able to tackle inflation unless you deal with this debt. Our generation is leaving our youth for the first time in American history worse off than our generation, which is very scary.
Service on our debt has surpassed military spending as a line item in the U.S. budget.
Interest now is the second largest item we spend money on in the States, and it's gonna make a run at Social Security for number one.
Today I'm talking with Michael Wheeler. Mike is a candidate competing in Texas's hotly contested 21st congressional district, and he first caught my attention because he talks about the national debt with a level of depth and clarity that is rare for politicians. Mike is a retired bond trader who spent over 30 years buying and selling high-yield corporate bonds. During this time, he became intimately familiar with the mechanics and threat of America's national debt. Before his run for Congress, Mike was also working in D.C. as a senior advisor for the U.S. Small Business Administration. Let's get into it. So, Mike, you're running for Congress in Texas's 21st congressional district. How's that feel?
Yeah, it's surreal, to be honest. I have to pinch myself sometimes, especially when you're driving around. It's such a big district geographically, and it dawns upon you what a huge responsibility it is, that you could actually represent this whole area, and it's a lot of responsibility, and I take that, very seriously. But it's an amazing feeling that I grew up in the country. I grew up of humble, very humble background, and to think that I'm actually running for Congress is just, it's an amazing feeling.
And you spent your career as a finance guy, and you worked for J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley as a bond trader. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a high yield bond trader. So high yield or junk bonds, some people call them. They're riskier companies, companies that have higher degrees of debt, and so they require higher yields, more risk. And so there's high yield, and then there's investment grade. And so I did mainly high yield.
Right on. So you're familiar with risky investments for highly indebted companies.
Yeah, my job was basically, we had a group of analysts, and we would study companies and study their debt. I know it sounds like pretty boring for some people, but you're studying how does a company operate. What's good about it? What's bad about it? And not just a company, we studied countries too. So what are they doing wrong? What's their strategic mission? What could they do? And that's kind of where my passion about the debt, U.S. national debt, comes in, because what could we do? That's how I start. That's how I think about it.
Sure.
So my whole career was basically centered around the debt markets, which it's very, you'd be surprised, government has so much to do with that as well, because government fiscal policy affects interest rates, which affects bonds, so you have to pay attention to all of it. So it was, you have to pay attention to the company. So you had to analyze the company, but you also had to be what's going on in the U.S. as far as our debt goes, what's going on in Italy, what's going on in Portugal, Argentina, Greece. You had to follow that as well. So that's why I loved it, because it was so, it was challenging in that regard. And you learned a ton about what's going on in the world.
Now, you're a kind of debt hawk with a level of kind of sincerity and commitment to that particular issue that I feel like is lacking for a lot of members of Congress. And there's this kind of ascendant school of thought on the left, pushed largely by Stephanie Kelton, right? This modern monetary theory, this idea that if a government is a sovereign currency issuer, you kind of don't have to worry about deficit spending. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Why does the debt matter if the U.S. is a sovereign currency issuer?
I love that question, because that actually gets right to the heart of the problem that people don't understand. So the people who buy by that modern monetary theory, or that thinks we can just print money our way out of this, they don't understand that the financial markets are the actual people in control of it. So the markets will tell you when they've had enough of your debt. So it's the same with companies. It's the same with countries. Like Greece, for instance. Greece, it didn't fully bankrupt, but it had to restructure. And the levels that the market just started demanding a higher and higher and higher level of interest rate, that it became you couldn't run the country with interest at that level. And so people don't understand that when the market decides, okay, like right now, the average interest rate on our debt is 3.3%, right? The market could say, well, that's not enough anymore for me to take the risk. If that interest rate went up like 2 percentage points, it'd be absolutely devastating, catastrophic for our country. And I can go into the. I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of explain it in kind of simple terms why it's the interest that matters so much, and why people have been talking about the debt for a long time, right? But I can explain real quickly why it's coming to a head, if you'd
Yeah,
like.
absolutely. And I'll throw in here interesting and terrifying little factoid that we
Mhm.
just passed an important milestone where service on our debt has surpassed military spending as a
Oh
line
yeah.
item in the U.S. budget. I mean, that's what we spend a lot on
Mhm.
defense. So that's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, please do break it down
It's
for
now,
us.
well, interest now is the second largest item we spend money on in the States. And it's gonna make a run at Social Security for number one. Um, so I like to explain it like this to people, why it's important. It's not necessarily the $38.5 trillion. Whoops, sorry about So it's not necessarily that number. Okay, so that number is terrible. It's the reason why we're in the trouble we are. But let's not focus on that for a second. It's the interest on that $38 trillion. So 10 years ago, the interest on that debt was 7% of all tax receipts that you and I, all of us, send into the government, went to interest payments. 7%. That was only 10 years ago. Today, that's 20%. In the next 3, 5, 10 years, it's going to move up to 25%. And
Wow.
if let's say we had another COVID, we had another shock. We've had, how many shocks to the system have we had over the past 20 years? It's incredible, right? So if we had any of those shocks, you're looking at it's going to be even a larger percentage of our tax receipts. So what's the problem with 25% of our tax receipts? Well, because 75% of our tax receipts is mandatory spending that we can't do a heck of a lot about. You and I, we would love to reform Medicaid, Medicare. Yes, we will do our best to do that. But realistically, you're still mandatory wise is going to be around 75%. That means discretionary, which is the Department of War, Health and Human Services, education, all those, transportation, all of that spending is discretionary. That's what Congress works on. So if 75 is mandatory, 25 is discretionary, and then another 25 is interest, you're at 125%. So you're over 100%. That means 25% of all your expenditures now have to be through debt issuance. That just causes inflation, and you'll never be able to tackle inflation unless you deal with this debt. Now you can do some things, right? You can reduce prices through what President Trump is doing with drill baby drill. That helps prices. If they could somehow get together and fix some healthcare, that would help with prices. But you can't structurally fix inflation until you tackle the debt. I don't know. I hope that makes sense. Like you can't, like
It does.
you just can't. That money can't come out of thin air. You have to print it.
And just to make this really explicit, like I know what you're going to say, but just, if I'm Stephanie Kelton and somehow I've just, been made Fed chair, right? Why can't I just run the printing press? What would
Well,
happen if we
you
just
could,
did
yeah,
that?
you could. She definitely could just run the printing press. But what you would have is runaway inflation. Like we saw what happened under Biden when when they passed all that extra spending, like
Mm.
with the extra 7 billion of spending under his time, or whatever that number was, 7 trillion. I mean, it just you get runaway inflation. There's too many. It's a very simple. It's economics. There's too many dollars chasing too few goods, and
Mm.
it's math. It's what it is. It's been since the beginning of time.
In some ways, like, I'm grateful that kind of Republicans still pay lip service to the debt.
Hmm.
But it does feel like in many cases it's just lip service, right? I mean, uh, the CBO estimates for One Big Beautiful Bill are that it adds something like 3.5 to $4 trillion to the deficit, right? Like,
Hmm.
the administration had given some lip service to abolishing the Department of Education, but instead gave them like an extra $200 million.
Hmm.
Doge, I was sort of hopeful in some way that like Doge was going to be this great kind of effective reducer of government waste. And yet, like, most independent analyses put their actual reduction, if we're being like generous, at like $10 billion. Now, you take their own headline number, it's like 160 billion. But even
Hmm.
if that's true, it's like really not enough.
Yeah.
So, as a Republican kind of member of Congress, like, how do you think about negotiating what might be positions where you're voting against like your colleagues and even the administration's spending
Hmm.
priorities?
Yeah. Like the big beautiful bill. So suppose like over 10 years, it's supposed to cut spending by $1.5 trillion over 10 years.
Mm.
The problem with that is over these 10 years, we're going to be uh, spending $86 trillion. It's a drop in the bucket, to what we're spending. We
And
are,
that's like assuming that those estimates are right, which are kind of
yeah,
friendly estimates, right?
they're never right. Yeah, it's never right. But just to give you an idea, it's like we as Congress, they patted themselves on the back for cutting $1.5 trillion when that's $150 billion a year. I mean,
Hmm.
it's just a drop in the bucket. We borrow about $6 billion a day. So the 160, 200 billion, whatever that Doge found, great. We need to keep doing that. Don't get me wrong. I like this waste, fraud, abuse is awful. And I can actually talk about something that I thought about the other day about this waste that people aren't really talking about yet. But at $6 billion a day, let's say that Doge found $180 billion of waste, right? That's 30 days of borrowing. That's it. That's all they found, and there has to be more done. And we're losing Chip Roy, we're losing Andy Biggs, we're losing David Schweikert. They're three guys that they're big debt hawks in Congress, and I'm just afraid that we're losing the people in Congress that get it, and at least like you can say what you want about, okay, the government's not doing anything, but Chip Roy was like basically every day is out there talking about spending
Mm.
and fighting against it. David Schweikert was out there every day fighting against it. That helps. It may not move the needle right away, but it helps. Um, but it's frustrating because people like to say we're going to grow our way out of it. Do you know how much GDP would have to grow basically this year to cover the deficit? This year's deficit, have to be about 15% GDP. We're going to get about five, it looks like, which is amazing. I mean, that's just like unheard of, right? But 15% to put it in perspective. So we're not going to just grow our way out of it. We're not going to just cut our way out of it. There has to be some financial thinking that goes into this about how to do it. And I have some ideas for that.
So let's say that, you know, Mike, you win and
Hmm.
you're now in Congress and all of your colleagues have a come to Jesus moment where they realize that you're right about this and they're going to vote your way. Like,
Hmm.
what do you do?
So the first thing I would do is start treating our government more like a business. And that is, so all we've talked about, even on this talk, right? All we've talked about is debt, right? But there's another side to the balance sheet, and it's called assets. right? And we have trillions of dollars of assets in this country. It could be, I've heard, I've seen, is it 60? Is it 120 trillion? I don't know. But let's say it's somewhere in that ballpark, right? I've seen estimates to that much. We don't know because we don't, like any company would do an inventory of their assets, right? We don't do an inventory of our assets. But let's say we have 630 trillion acres of land. We get a very minuscule return on that land, very small. Like, so if you and I have a 401k and we made 5 to 7% a year, we're fine. That's pretty good. That's not bad. I'll take that over the course of my lifetime. We're getting like 0.1% return on our country's assets. So what I propose is, hey, let's start treating our assets more like a portfolio management would, something like what a company would do, and start squeezing money out of our assets. And I'm not talking about. I think we have to be very careful. I'm not talking about joining with companies. I'm not talking about getting on their board of directors. I'm not talking about picking winners and losers.
No
I'm
golden
talking
shares.
no golden shares, none of that. I'm talking about how do we leverage our assets in order to, like, project finance. How do we project finance? Say we would lend, and we do this already. We lend money to businesses at a very cheap rate as the U.S. government, but we don't demand anything else in return except for the money and a small interest rate. Why aren't we getting equity warrants on that? Equity warrants aren't. You don't take control of the company. You just share in the upside. That's all. And I'm just saying, like, people think, okay, well, you're going to get involved in picking the winners, and the government gets bigger. I can't stand government bigger. Believe me, but you've got to start thinking outside the box when you've got to tackle $38 trillion of debt. I just got done saying that, like, you can't cut your way out of it. You can't grow your way out of it. So, and it's an existential threat. So what do you want to do about it? If not that, you know?
Sure. No, that does raise a question I'd love to dive more into. I mean, we saw this during the Obama administration with GM, right? GM gets a big bailout. The government gets a stake. We saw this recently with Intel.
Yeah.
Like, how do you avoid, when kind of the Leviathan has a stake in the success of certain, like, corporate entities? Like, how do you avoid the perverse incentives of the state then wanting to put their thumb on the scale in favor of their investments?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I don't think the government should be involved in picking winners and losers. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with bailouts. And that's coming from a guy who, I was in the banking industry in 07 to 09, when everybody got bailed out, and it's not that I didn't understand it. It's not ideal,
Sure.
it should be, I must say, at that point, it felt like the world was ending. It really did. So I understand having to feel like you had to do something to save it, because it really did feel that way. But normally, I would love to just let the free markets decide who's going to make it and who isn't,
Sure.
and I think we should aim for that in every case we can. So I don't want to take equity stakes in companies. I don't think we have to. I think if we were to say, like, let me give you an example. At the Small Business Administration, where I was working before running, we had this program called the SBIC program. And a private equity firm would come in and they'd say, hey, we're going to invest in critical technologies in this field and this, and this. And we would check, like, we would interview them. We do research on them. They're amazing. The SBA, these people are amazing. They've been doing it for years. And so they'd come in, you'd interview them. And these are the real deal people. These are real private equity people. They say, hey, we've raised 100 million. And then SBA, if you pass the process, the SBA would give you a loan, say, of $175 million. But that loan would be at like 4.5%. And out in the free markets, that PE firm, private equity firm, would be paying 12 to 15% for that. But so it's a way for the government to invest in our country without picking a winner or a loser. We leave that up to the professionals. But what I'm saying, an idea that we have is, instead of just asking for that 4.5% interest and the money back. Let's let the government and not the government, the taxpayer. Let's remember, like, that money's ours, right? The $200 million you're loaning this is our money, right? So let's let you and I share in the upside with the private equity firm. We just gave them a sweet deal at 4.5%. And then what we do as a government, we take our profits and we reduce debt with it. It like if we increased our return on assets from 0.1% to 3%, you're talking about trillions of dollars of reduction in debt. But the thing is, you just need more people in Washington that think that way. Like Scott Bessent, I believe, thinks that way. Howard Lutnick, I believe, thinks that way. It's moving in that direction. We just need more of them. There's less than 5% of people in the United States House of Representatives that have financial market experience, but yet they control the purse strings of the whole country.
Yeah, overwhelmingly lawyers, right?
Yeah.
One of the things during our debt conversation that I've been thinking about is U.S. dollar dominance and the kind of threat that running the printing press poses to that. And it's kind of something that you don't hear a lot of discussion about. I'd be curious from your perspective, like, what does the U.S. get for issuing the world reserve currency? Like, what's in it for us?
So we have to refinance, say, around $10 trillion every year. It's almost let's just say $1 trillion a month, for lack of, for easy math. That reserve currency, so that makes China, Japan, Korea, they have to buy our treasuries, because in order to transact, they have to transact in US dollars. So let's say, and this is what's happening that's scary, is that let's say China and Brazil want to transact with each other, trade. It used to be that they'd have to have a middleman, which was the US dollar, to make that transaction.
And
now,
why is that? Just before we get into what they're...
Because the US dollar was the most stable, had the most value, was the most trusted.
So in other words, it's what everyone did trade in. Every country was buying or selling. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they had a lot. It's full faith and credit of the United States government, right? So that had a lot of people. If you have faith in a currency, you feel good about that it's actually worth what the guy's selling it to me for. And that it's like the inflation rate isn't going to be such that this dollar is now going to depreciate, and it's going to lose its value. I could trust it. So, but now what the BRICS nations are doing, if you've heard of BRICS, they're trying to diminish the value, the importance of our currency. And if we lose that, then we lose a huge amount of buyers for that $10 trillion or $12 trillion that we have to refinance every year. Who's going to buy it? If we lose, if they don't have to buy US dollars anymore, they won't.
Do you believe that the US has overplayed its hand in using economic choke points in order to pursue kind of foreign policy objectives? So, US sanctions, freezing assets, that sort of thing. Like, do you think that we've been too heavy-handed and that's caused this kind of erosion in confidence and has made something like BRICS more attractive?
Yeah, I do. And I understand why we did it. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I think one of the first things we did was we froze all the Russian assets. I think it was like $300 billion or something like that, right? So if you're China and you see, you do something wrong and you see the first thing that America does is freeze all your assets that are in their country, you don't want to own their assets in their country. You don't want to have assets in their country, because if I do something that makes the government angry, they'll just freeze my assets. So that reduces the value of the dollar. It makes the dollar less attractive, less trusting And I'm not like I understand why we do it. It's not an easy scenario. It's just that sometimes people have to think that that's an unintended consequence. They did
Sure.
not intend for that to be like they thought they were, we had to do something to Russia, right? So, but there's an unintended consequence, and we're not very good in this country at looking what are the unintended consequences.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think also we probably underestimated the kind of incredible competence of, for all their kind of incompetence on the battlefield and carelessness with their own citizens' lives. There's been an
Hmm.
incredible amount of competence on the part of kind of the Russian bank, right?
Hmm.
Their central bank has been incredibly adept at keeping them afloat through all of this.
Hmm.
And I don't know that we were prepared for how competent and resilient they'd be financially.
I totally agree, and a lot of it has to do with oil. A lot of it has to do with China,
Mm-hmm.
because let's be China and Russia are allies. They are joined at the hip. And one thing I've done a lot of research on recently is like Greenland, right? What has Greenland got to do with all of this? Well, it's right in the middle of all of what we're talking about right now. Russia and China. So Russia has the north of Russia is basically the Arctic, right? They have all that land up there,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have the money really to develop it, right? So guess who's doing that? It's China. China is infusing all this money, billions of dollars, into for LNG plants, for ports, and now Russia is able to ship their oil directly to China in like half the time that they
Mm-hmm.
used to be able to do. It's a huge boom for Russia. Um, and then Greenland. Okay, so why is Greenland so important? Because there are new routes that are opening up through this. There used to be just like this. It's called the GI Greenland, Iceland, UK route. It was very narrow, and that was the only way from the Arctic into the North Atlantic. Now there are more routes opening up, and Russia wants access and China wants access to those routes, because if China gets access to those routes, it cuts their shipping times to Europe in half. I mean, can you imagine how much money that is? It also gives them direct access to the North Atlantic, which is right. That's us, right? So it's very strategic. It's very strategic.
So on Greenland, I guess what do you think is the right course of action there? I mean, does the U.S. have to own Greenland in order to fulfill its kind of geopolitical aims,
No,
or
I
there?
think the president actually is pretty much got almost what we needed without having to do anything. Like we
Mm,
have mineral rights now. We can do anything basically. I think they've basically agreed that we can do everything we need strategically to keep it safe for us without having to invade or buy or whatever.
what materially changed as a result of the kind of, I mean, aside from obviously maybe heightened tensions with our NATO allies, like what else has changed as a result of kind of the most recent drama around Greenland?
Yeah, people. The thing that's amazing that President Trump gets that President Biden did not get is how much leverage we have as a country.
Mm,
There's nobody comes close to us as far as consuming in this world. Nobody.
sure.
The world needs us. The president understands that, and he leverages it to our advantage. And that's what people understand, that it's you need to respect our leverage before, because we'll use it. Whereas in the past 4 years prior, there was no concern whatsoever of us reciprocating or anything. So that's a big deal. Like Venezuela is another. It's a big deal what we did in Venezuela.
And when you say leverage, I assume you're talking mostly about tariffs, right?
Yeah, tariffs. Yeah, like tariff support. With NATO. Like like NATO would be nothing without us, right?
Hmm.
Um, we have a lot of leverage. They need us for defense. I mean, Europe has let their defense struggle for years. You know, Europe, the world is in a really bad place right now. Europe is awful. China is getting destroyed. Europe is horrible as well. So the world is in a tough spot right now, and they really need America.
Do you believe that Europe will be looking to disentangle from the
I do.
U.S.?
Yeah. Oh,
Do
disentangle
you
from the
think
U.S. No,
you don't
no.
think so?
I
You,
no.
my
They
my
can't. I.
my concern is I look at, Denmark, for example, historically a pretty staunch U.S. ally, is fought alongside us in Afghanistan,
Hmm.
um, and I look at their air force and their American fighter jets,
Hmm.
and the U.S. holds a kill switch on those planes, right? I mean, their air force could be effectively grounded with a
Hmm.
push of a button, um, from the U.S. And it makes me wonder, if I'm Denmark after kind of the interaction over NATO, like, is there a world in which these countries start saying, well, maybe we need to look elsewhere to buy our, you know, war material, either developing it
Hmm.
domestically or potentially buying it from, one of our adversaries or at least rivals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think there's a risk of that? I mean, I think about our
Oh yeah. Yeah.
conversation about I think about our conversation about maybe overplaying our hand with financial warfare and that
Hmm.
causing folks to look for an alternative in BRICS, for example. And I wonder if we don't see the
Right.
same thing with
Yeah.
defense in Europe.
Yeah. It very well could be that way too. That's a good point. The thing we have on our side is just not a heck of a lot of choice. You know, out there,
Mhm.
it's like
Sure,
Russia or China, maybe
sure.
India down the road. But right now it's really Russia or China, and I think we're lucky that China is it's shown itself. You know, but you're right. I mean, it's not a like it could be one of those unintended consequences. I think we really need to pay attention to. So when you negotiate, there's a fine line from being very heavy-handed
Mhm.
and demanding everything you want. And when, like, I always think about negotiation, if you leave the table kind of like, that wasn't the great, but it's okay, then that's a pretty good deal. It's not great, but I think we have to be careful of that to make sure that like they're not leaving the table like, man, they guys just ripped us apart on that deal.
Sure,
You're right.
because
It's
there's
human
other
nature.
deals to be done down the road.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No, that makes sense. Um, it's just touching briefly on China because I think you alluded to some of the issues that they're facing. Obviously, a real estate crisis, probably an
Hmm.
impending demographic crisis, and most recently, I don't know if you saw this, but uh, Xi's now like arresting some of the top generals, including I think the only guy in kind of high leadership, high military leadership in China with any actual combat experience.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think kind of the state of play is between the U.S. and China? You hear so much talk about China as an ascendant power, maybe one that will eclipse the U.S. in coming years. But then you see these, real kind of persistent problems in Chinese society and government. Like, how do you think
Hmm.
about that?
I think China is in a world of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. Communism doesn't work. Um, by 2050, their estimated population is going to be cut in half because
Mm-hmm.
of their previous one child policy. I mean, it's going to go from 1.3 trillion people or 1.4 trillion people, or I'm sorry,
Billion, I think. Yeah.
billion
Yeah.
people, yeah, to 650 million. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm caught up on the debt.
All
But
good.
yes,
All
I
good.
mean, it gets cut in half. I mean, they have cities that they've built that are empty, nobody
Mm-hmm.
living in any of the buildings because they just propped up their real estate market. Their their financial crisis, the crisis that we had in '27 to '09, pales to comparison to what they're going through. Um, so yeah, I think that they're in trouble. I do. I really think that they're weak. I think that that's why Taiwan is probably in their sights. What do you do when you're up against the wall? You know you come out fighting. And that's what I'm concerned about. What are they going to do to offset this? You know.
Now, you see you see this kind of cultural ascendance, we'll call it, um, from China, where I look at, young people on TikTok, for example, are talking about, like, China maxing, which is just like this idea of embracing Chinese culture,
Mm,
kind of admiring China's soft power. But also, you hear this idea where kind of young people who are frustrated with maybe their lot in the American system
mhm.
have increasingly unfavorable views of, like, capitalism as such. What do you think's behind that?
I think it's affordability.
Mm-hmm.
I think they feel like they've been left behind. I feel like our generation is leaving our youth for the first time in American history worse off than our generation. I think they have every right to be upset. I do. Price of housing, you name it, is almost 60% of our people under 30 years old are more accepting of socialism these days, which is very scary. And the reason I think is affordability, because in the 1950s, um, it was around 50%, I think, of people who were, say, 30 years old who had a house and had a child by the time they're 30 years old. Now that number is below 15%, right? They can't afford to get on that ladder. It's next to impossible for some people. The average age now of buying a house, first house, is 40 years old. Um, so what's I think happening is that they're throwing up their arms and saying, if I can't have the American dream, then nobody can have the American dream. So I'm going to go to the socialist where everybody's equal, right? I think that's what's driving this. And I think that we're doing a disservice of just pointing our finger at the youth and saying, "Oh, they just like to go down in their basement and play video games." You know, yeah, some do, but that's no reason to give up on the whole generation.
And
Um,
that's not necessarily a new phenomenon, right? I mean, you had
mm,
kind of the, like,
mhm,
tune in, turn on, drop out movement
yeah,
of the 60s. I mean, I think it's sort of every generation looks at the upcoming generation and goes, "Oh,
mhm,
they're lost and unproductive," and
yeah,
yet somehow we muddle through.
yeah.
Um, but what do you do about the frustrations that you see in the upcoming
So,
generation and this kind of loss of
um,
faith in capitalism as a system?
so one thing I want to do is education is one thing. So let's inform them when they're making their decisions at a younger age what the future looks like for them. So, for instance, let's say you go to your guidance counselor. You're in high school, and you're trying to decide, what do you do next year, right? Do I go to college? Do I go vocational? What do I do? So, let's say you go to your guidance counselor and you say, I want to be an art history major. Okay. So your guidance counselor then pulls up the data on art history majors and says, you're going to be making, when you get done your degree, you're going to be making $50,000 a year for 10 years. And your debt on your education is going to be this, your rent is this, your credit card's this, your car payment's this. And so you're going to be in the red X amount per month, let's say.
Mm.
And that is probably going to have to go on a credit card or something, right? So it's transparent. They may look at that and say, you know what, maybe art history isn't the right degree for me. Maybe it's engineering, maybe it's being a welder, maybe it's being maybe construction, maybe HVAC. But you've got to have some transparency. That's to me, that's the first step. The second step is you start, and this is, I think, going to happen in our country. I believe it's going to change. The school, the debt of schools, the student debt, um, right now, these universities, they're no accountability whatsoever. So it's up to you and me if we are handing out loans to people who can't afford, who are not never going to be able to pay them back, then shame on us, right? The schools can give out those degrees because right now when those kids fail to pay their loans off, you and I have to pick up the check, right? I want to make the schools on the hook for those loans. So if you give
Yeah.
out an art, you can go out and give your gender study degree, go right ahead, okay? But if that student does not pay us back, you're on the hook for that, not us.
Yeah.
um you know.
I think there are really perverse incentives when you have these like guaranteed loans that can't be
Yeah.
discharged with bankruptcy, right? And it does put, this kind of albatross of student debt around the necks of the students. But it
Hmm.
also, I think, creates these really perverse incentives for schools who are trying to maximize their profits, understandably, but
Hmm.
aren't assuming any of the risk. Like if they're selling a bad product, there's no real risk there for them, is there?
Right. No, and you can charge, so no risk, so that therefore you can charge any amount you want to charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't have to worry if it's going to get paid back or not. You can hand out any degree you want because you don't have to worry if it's getting. It's like one thing I will tell my boys. I have two boys that are 23 and 24. Never go into business with somebody. Never join a partnership where both of you don't have skin in the game, right? It doesn't work. One will always take advantage of the other. To me, it's something to live your business career with. It just doesn't work. And so but I have another idea. Well, the thing that's so frustrating about me with government is I don't have the solutions, but we don't talk about it. So I have this idea of, and again, I don't want government to be bigger, but I'm trying to find out solutions to this crisis. Like how do we make housing available, like more affordable for these kids, right? So I threw out an idea of, what if let's say they chose to go into vocational education. Let's say, okay, 2 years, you don't have to pay income tax on the money that you make. You don't get to keep that. It goes into a 401k type of an instrument, and it can only be used as a down payment on a house. So in 3 years or so, you have enough money you've saved. And that way the government doesn't. I'm trying to keep the money out of the government's hand into
Mm-hmm.
your hands, right? The government wastes money beyond recognition. You know, it's always going to, in my opinion, going to work better when you have the money in your hands. So if they had that in 3 years and they could buy a starter home, that changes everything. They can start having kids. They feel part of the community. They're invested in America. I think some plan, like look what President Trump is doing with the fund. Giving each baby $1,000. Look what's happening. All these companies are now coming in and giving money to them as well. And then some of these kids are going to, be 18 years old and have 70 or $80,000 in the bank. You know, it's a similar thing to that, I think.
When we talk about affordability in housing, I wonder how much you think that's a local issue. And the reason I ask that is I recently read Abundance, the new book by Ezra Klein. Um,
Mhm.
and in it, he's kind of promoting a new vision for the Democratic Party specifically. And he's saying, look,
Mhm.
there are all these red cities that don't actually have uh, affordability problems when it comes to housing, that don't actually have housing shortages. And it comes down to the fact that they tend to be much more lenient with zoning and
Mhm.
permitting. And like I wonder how effective a sort of federal solution can be when at the city level you still have places where it's like impossible to build more high
Mhm.
density housing. Um, and you look at a city like Houston, for all of its issues, it doesn't have a housing shortage in the same way that like San Francisco does, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So how do you think about that? I mean, how do you think about like this maybe being a problem that has to be solved locally? And if it has to be solved locally, like how do you get consensus on that?
I mean, most of that's housing is in blue cities. Let's say we just mentioned San Fran and Houston. one of the reasons we have a problem is look at California, for instance. It's taking people still don't have permits from the fires. It's insane how long it takes to get through the red tape in some of these places. Now, so let's take the hill country. You got to be more careful here because we don't have the resources. Like we are limited on water here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just open it up and make things so easy for everybody to build here because we don't have the resources to do it. So it's a really tough question, but I think in areas where they don't have those problems, you've got to cut the red tape. You've got to make it easier for you to build a house. Like the people, like your house burned down, you shouldn't have to wait 3 years for a permit to rebuild it. You know,
Yeah.
but I want to be very careful of the government getting involved in the like, especially getting involved in building housing. Like I'm extremely concerned about like the Democrat Party uh building houses in like so this I think this is happening all over Texas, I believe, is they're building like Section 8 housing in red areas, right? I think that's happening. And the reason why that's happening is to expand their footprint,
Mm-hmm.
into the red districts. That's what's going on. And I saw it in London. I lived in London for a number of years, and you'll be in the most gorgeous neighborhood, and then um, they'll put a tenement house up right in the middle of it because the government has gotten involved and build public housing. We just have got to stay away from all that. But yeah, it's more of a local issue.
One of the things that you've talked a fair bit about is reshoring manufacturing. Where does that fit into your planning here?
So that's what I was working on at the SBA was my main project there.
Mm-hmm.
It's see the tariffs I believe are a blunt object to get a better deal for us, and it needs to happen to get those jobs back to the US. Like we must reshore American manufacturing. We cannot be dependent. We were talking about leverage earlier. We cannot be dependent on China for 90% of our pharmaceutical ingredients, for 90% of our rare earths processing. We can't be dependent on that. Those jobs have to come back to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just issue a tariff and then expect the company to come back, right? It's more complicated than that. They need to have, because not all of these companies are massive companies like Coca-Cola, or like these are mid-range, smaller manufacturers. They need access to capital. They need procurement orders from the U.S. government in order to go get that capital. They need help. They need help to find employees and housing for employees. So it's a much bigger issue than just slapping a tariff on somebody and hoping they move their manufacturing back to the U.S. We've lost, I think, 7 million jobs over the past 30 or 40 years to manufacturing. I tell a story when I was a young boy. My dad lost his job to China and from a manufacturing firm, and we never recovered as a family. And so you want to talk about a boom for the middle class. Bring some of these high paying, like these really good paying manufacturing jobs to the US. I think it'd be a huge uplift. And it also, we do need to think about AI and what effect that will have on people's employment. And I think manufacturing could be a way that we fill that void.
Now, U.S. manufacturing output, so not jobs, but just the amount of stuff we produce, the value of the stuff we produce, has kind of gone up and up and up for a long time. And in fact, we're the world's second largest manufacturer after China, with a third of the population, or less than a third of the population. And I think about agriculture in the U.S., right? Like there was a time when upwards of 80% of all Americans were involved in agriculture. And obviously our agricultural output has gone up, and now it's, maybe like less than 2% of Americans actually work in agriculture. Like, is there a world in which you think that might be the case for manufacturing, where just better automation, has made it so that our kind of manufacturing output can go up while we've continued to lose jobs. And in fact, we've even, I think in this last year, lost something like another 60,000 manufacturing jobs while increasing output. Like,
Mhm.
how do you think about that? I mean, if we
I just
bring all these companies home, like, does that make a meaningful impact in jobs?
Well, I think it well, for two things. I think it does. Like we don't produce any of the kind of what I like to call them boring semiconductor chips in the United States. Stuff that makes your
Mm,
windshield go up and down. Like we don't produce in your refrigerator, that keeps the temperature correct or whatever. We don't produce any of those chips here in the United States. None, right? Um, so you could kill two birds with one stone. You bring them in, you bring that manufacturing back to the US. Yes, there's automation that will happen that will continue to happen, right? We just have to keep adapting. So yeah, automation is going to continue to happen. Like I get it, but I can't tell, like I don't know what it's going to be like in 20 years. But right now there is a need for chips in this country. There is a
mm,
need for rare earths in this country. There's a need for pharmaceuticals in this country. We need all of that stuff, right? And
mm,
that's going to be a series of years before all of that becomes automated. So yeah, down the road, everything turns to automation, but we need those jobs now. Like those currently aren't being like we need people to make. So for instance, I was working on bringing gloves and masks during COVID. You know, we couldn't get any gloves or masks in this country, right? And the reason is because China and Malaysia make them all, right? And they're made by big machines, but they employ a lot of people as well, right? And we have people that trying to bring those manufacturing facilities back to the United States, but they're having a hard time getting the procurement orders from the U.S. government. If they got those orders, they could go get capital and build their manufacturing facilities and hire employees. So yes, there will be automation. It will continue. We will continue to advance. And you're absolutely right. But for what we're dealing with right now, I think it's the best solution.
You talked a bit about tariffs, and there was a time, I think we've seen the kind of slow march, or maybe not so slow march of executive power kind of expanding over the course of the history of this country, right? I mean, really almost since day one. And there was a time when the tariff power was one that was vested firmly with Congress. So how do you think about kind of executive power and the use of executive power for tariffing?
You
And
know,
what's the role
I
of Congress in checking that, like, if any?
Yeah, I think the Congress, I think the president, I think it's twofold. The president needs the ability to act.
Mm,
So I don't want to take that from him. I think he's the one negotiating these deals, and he needs that power. But I do think Congress's job is oversight and make sure it's not being abused. But I don't think he should have to go check with Congress every minute that he wants to do something like this. And um, it just it just create more bureaucracy. Nothing would ever get done. You know what I
mm.
mean? It's just bigger government. And I think he needs that ability to act. Now I will say this about the tariffs. One thing I love about Scott Bessent, I heard this story, and I think it's true, is when President Trump announced the tariffs that a few months ago, 6, 8, 9 months ago. Um, the market went crazy. I think the 10-year almost treasury almost made it to 5% again. I mean, it was out of control because the market was uncertain about what's going to happen. Well, with $38 trillion of debt, you can't afford to have the debt go up that high. So I think what happened is Scott Bessent went in there and said, Mr. President, you've got to pull back on this because the market's going crazy. And I think that's what we saw. So we have good people up there, but it's a slippery slope. It's because
Mm.
if the Democrats were in charge, I'd probably be saying the opposite because they just don't. Their philosophy is different than ours. But I think tariffs are a good blunt instrument to get good trade deals done.
Yeah, and I think that you spoke to what I think is like a kind of perennial challenge in politics, right? Which is kind of any power you imbue the executive with or any rules you set up for Congress, right? Those are things you have to live with when the
Mm,
other side's in charge. And in
yeah.
fact, the tendency has been not just for things to stay the same, but for the boundaries to be pushed further,
Hmm.
um, which is, as it's one of the things that makes me uncomfortable sometimes. Like
Hmm.
even if I see something unfolding that I'm like, I maybe I agree with, the maybe I agree with a particular action being taken, but sometimes the means really matters. And I think a lot about that because,
Yeah.
turnabout is fair play.
Hmm. A perfect example is the filibuster, I think.
Hmm.
So what do we do about the filibuster? There's a lot of people, Republicans now, that want to do away with the filibuster, right?
Sure.
Well, if we do away with the filibuster, when the Democrats get in charge, what they're going to do is make Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico a state, and then we're out of power forever. But I do think one thing that needs to be done with the filibuster, something like that as an example, is I see why we're thinking it, because when the Democrats get in charge, I guarantee you that's one of the first things that they do is get rid of the filibuster. So we have to deal with it now. Like, we have to
Hmm.
make it airtight that nobody can ever get, like, if we have to make it so nobody can ever change the filibuster, or we have to change like, we have to do something. We can't just
Sure.
we can't we're in power right now, right? If we don't do something about the filibuster right now, shame on us, you know?
Yeah, no, I think I think you're absolutely right, right? You always hear, majorities saying we got to do something, about this filibuster that's just the other side can just obstruct us all
Hmm.
day long. And I think, for Republicans in particular, I'm like, I don't know, these midterms are going to be rough, I
Yeah.
think. And it would be, maybe not the wisest thing to be talking about getting rid of
Hmm.
the filibuster right before you're about to become,
Right.
the minority,
Right.
um,
I would just like to
in all
see it
likelihood.
permanently. I would like to see it permanently instituted so that neither party could get rid of
Can
the
touch it.
filibuster. Hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good, I think that's a good principle. Last kind of question for you. I'm
Hmm.
curious. We're now looking at the upcoming midterms, potentially Trump becoming, a lame duck president.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a question about what's next for the Republican Party. You've seen people who have sort of tried to copy Trump's brand, and it seems like Trump is kind of a singular political animal, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
There's not going to be another one.
No.
And so there's some different direction that the Republican Party takes, and that could be a kind of JD Vance style populism, or it
Hmm.
may be that you have a kind of Marco Rubio, like more neoconservative bent, or it may be, that something really outlandish happens, and you have a direction like, Rand Paul has been making the circuit lately,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And looking, dare I say, like awfully presidential in the making those rounds. Now, whether or not he has a future as kind of um, a national kind of avatar of the Republican Party, I don't know.
Hmm.
But what do you think happens to the GOP kind of after Trump?
Well, the great thing about it is we have such great, talented people. I never knew Marco Rubio was this good, really. He's amazing, I think. We have JD Vance, who's amazing. You know, we have a lot of depth in our party. Kelly Loeffler, who at the SBA, and Brooke Rollins, and we just have so many good, strong people. But you're absolutely right. Nobody's going to replace President Trump, ever. Like, it's not going to happen. And that's what I think the Republican Party is to me is the biggest risk. And let's just take Texas, if we can, for an example. Um, Before President Trump, the Democratic Party was gaining ground massively in Texas. Our margins of victory were going smaller. Name a city that's not under Democrat hold now in Texas.
Central
Yeah, so they're
Texas,
all
yeah.
down. It's all Democrats. So like my fear for Texas is President Trump is no. And look what happened in Texas 9 last weekend or 2 weekends ago, right? We lost that seat. It was a Trump plus 17 seat, and we lost it, right? And yeah, turnout, all that. We want to say that, but when President Trump is not on the ballot, Texas was losing ground to the Democrats. I'm very concerned that now we're just like we're dependent on President Trump. He's gone, and we've kind of become lazy in getting out the vote and all that. And I am concerned about that. I'm very concerned about not having President Trump on the ballot. He's our leader. He galvanizes people to the polls. We vote when he's on the ballot, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure we maintain that. So I think it's a massive concern for our party, regardless of who. We have great talent. The lucky thing we have is the Democrats have no talent. And they're like, if they, let's say if the Democrats put up another Bill Clinton-esque person that the way he was back 30, 40 years ago, we may have a battle on our hands, you know?
Sure. I wonder what the ideological core of the Republican Party is now, right? There are certain Republican circles where you'll be kind of, teased or heckled for being Reaganite, which was kind of the gold standard of Republican ideology for a long time. I look at President Trump, and I don't think he's a terribly ideological person. I mean, I think you could make the argument that he's got like some maybe Buchananite tendencies, but I think they're more tendencies than like, a kind of deeply coherent ideology. And so I wonder, like, as contrasted to like a J.D. Vance, right, who has very coherent political philosophy that can be critiqued, but he has a coherent political philosophy. Marco Rubio has a political philosophy. Rand Paul has a political philosophy. And I just wonder, like, what is the intellectual tradition? Because it can't be Trumpism, because Trumpism, as I see it, kind of exists in Donald Trump's head and not really anywhere else. So I just kind of like, I'm wondering what is the, which way do things swing? And obviously neither of us have a crystal ball. But I do wonder about that.
Well, we have it happening to both parties. So, the Democrat Party is moving to socialism, right? I would like us to be more united as a party and stop being so, critical of each other if we maybe not agree on everything,
Sure.
I think there should be a little bit more movement there. Like our values are better than the Democrat socialist values. But I agree. I think you're right. We have a danger of eating our own and really giving away a great situation that the Democrats are handing us by not uniting and by this infighting that we tend to have. And there's the party. You're right about Reagan. It's like I bet you Reagan would have a hard time getting elected these days. I would be a bit surprised.
It's a good point that you make, though, about this being kind of a issue for Democrats as well. I mean, you see this kind of insurgency coming from the DSA, kind of going to war with, we'll call them like the Ezra Klein Democrats, right? Who are writing about, hey, we need to embrace business, we need to build more, we need to lean into innovation. And growth, and then you have an almost like anti-growth wing of the Democratic Party, again, kind of coming out of the DSA. Any predictions on where the Democratic Party goes? Like, do you think Zoran is the new face of Democrats, or do you think that there will be a kind of moderating backlash within their ranks?
Yeah, I think there will eventually be, but we're not there. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think the pendulum has swung far enough yet for them. You need, like, New York City is going to be a disaster. Like you need like all these banks moving out of Wall Street. People need a smack. Like, it's human nature, right?
Sure.
Until it hurts, you don't do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't think people have seen the the effect of these socialist policies yet. I don't. I think there's going to be more to come. I think New York, like I just was listening about New York, how they dealt with the freeze and their snow that they had. It's just there's garbage piled up everywhere, right? It's
Mhm.
it's going to take some time for them to really feel it. But again, back to the Republican Party, I'd like to see us take advantage of this opportunity,
Mhm.
right? Let us be the party of the like we are the party of the working class, right? We are the party of the everyday person these days, right? We need to take advantage of that and not let any kind of infighting get in the way of absolutely destroying that socialist party. That's what I'm concerned about. Um you know what, let's have a conversation. You don't agree with me on something, it's fine, right? But let's not destroy the other Republican because of it. Let's try to have a discourse and talk about it and how to, like what I was talking about, the affordability for kids. It's like, let's just not point the finger at these kids and say, it's their fault. Let's take this opportunity to bring them into our party and find a solution for them and grow our party while the Democrat Party destroys itself. That's what I would like us to do.
Wonderful. We'll leave it there unless there's anything you want to
Okay.
add at the end.
No, no, I just one quick thing that I think also needs to be addressed. I've learned this in my race is I kind of knew it before, but I did know it before, but now I've really seen it and how it's going to be hard to accomplish any of this until we reduce the influence special interest has in
Mm.
Washington D.C. Until we get term limits, we must have term limits. We must have the end of stock trading by individuals in Congress. Like I need like I made a pledge. I'm making a pledge, and people can say, "Oh yeah, whatever." You make a pledge. I mean, this is I'm not going to take a dime from pharma, insurance, banks, environmental companies. I will not be funded by these companies because you owe them, right? All these endorsements that you see floating around right now, because this is endorsement season, right? They come with obligations, right?
Sure.
You owe somebody, you owe a vote, you owe something as a result of that. I want people out there to understand that. And if you're tired of this process of special interest, right? Please don't continue to send the same people to Washington D.C.
Yeah, I love that. Especially, I mean, talking about term limits. Man, you see some of these, like videos of Congress, and it looks like the Walking Dead out there. I mean,
Oh,
it's how do you go about tackling that? This is a great French goodbye, by the way. It's
yeah.
perfect. So,
No,
what do you do about that?
so listen, I would bet a lot of money that there will never be a bill on the floor of the House of Representatives on term limits, right? I just don't think it'll happen. So it has to be done by the individual. So if I can do it, right, I'll sign a term limit. I'll hold myself to it, and then try to put pressure on all the individuals to do it as well. Kind of like,
Mhm.
you know what, you want to be in the Freedom Caucus, you want to be in this part of a caucus, you have to sign it. You have to sign this term limit. You can't be in Congress for longer than X, right? It has to happen because if it is so difficult to beat an incumbent, right? Like if you're an incumbent that have been in Congress for 8 years and I'm a newbie and I wanted to run for Congress, I can't beat you. It's impossible, right? You start with such an advantage financially. It won't work. So like I in theory, I'd rather just leave it up to the people, but the system is broke, right? The system is absolutely broke, and we're not getting the best people in Congress because of it.
Isn't like Dianne Feinstein still voting from beyond the grave at
From
this
the
point?
grave, yeah,
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 it
yeah.
it does feel that way. I mean, is
Mhm.
there is there a is there something to be said or learned maybe from like what Alaska has done? So, Alaska has open primaries and ranked choice voting. Like,
Mm.
is something like that worth considering?
I don't think so. I don't like ranked choice voting and the open and closed primaries. Like we want to close our primaries, and I get why we want to close our primaries.
Hmm.
Um, I just hope that we do it with a plan. I
Mhm.
hope the Republican Party of Texas has a plan to do it so we don't lose
Sure.
voters. But I'm for it. I'm all for it. If that's what we want to do, let's do it. But a lot of my, like, you'll learn about me. My philosophy is I don't want to just like say something, do something without a plan, right?
Sure.
But no, I don't like ranked choice voting. I think what we have to do is we have to put pressure on our demand of our people that we vote for, that you're going to sign a term limit, that you are going to, and we're going to be specific about how many years you'll be there. I also talked to this is what I love, like, on the being campaigning. I talked to this gentleman last night. I thought it was such a brilliant idea. Like, so if you're a freshman in Congress, you're going to be put at the lowest level of every committee there is, right? It takes years to work to a level where you can feel like you can make change. What if we change that around? This was his idea. I can't take credit for it. We change that around, and a certain percentage of freshmen actually get put on good committees. So we start getting their input right away, right? Instead of having to be in Congress for 12 years to make change,
Sure. I mean, yeah, by the time you get enough kind of clout that you matter in Congress, it seems like you're kind of already compromised, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something corrupting about DC, and when folks spend, a decade there,
hmm
it seems like kind of by the time they get there, they've lost sight of what they hoped to achieve when they started
Yeah.
that journey.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's the problem. And I think, you know what? It's good to have these conversations, and demand this of your people that you vote for. Find out what their real motivation is to go to Washington. We're sending too many people to Washington without the right motivation. You know. But yeah, I just want to make it like, in finishing. We talked about ranked choice voting. I just, and open primaries and all that. Like, the people want a closed primary. The Republican Party wants a closed primary. Fine, good, okay. I support what the party wants to do. But again, I want to make that point that let's talk about what are the unintended consequences, and let's deal with that. Like, it's how I would deal with all of government. What are the unintended consequences of this decision, and let's deal with them up front,
Mhm.
right? Instead of waiting for them to smack us in the face. That's what I want to bring to Congress.
Love that. Mike Wheeler, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And
Enjoyed
good
it.
luck out there.
Thank you. Thank you.